Hi everyone, nice to meet you. As Mark said, name's Matthew, work at Blockchain Labs, and today we're going to talk about ICOs 101. Blockchain presentations are always pretty tricky, so this one does require a little bit of an understanding of what a blockchain is. So how many people in the audience could explain a blockchain? One, two, couple. Could you explain it to your mum? A few less hands. Okay, cool. So hopefully I've got this at the right level. It's always pretty tricky, so I've left plenty of time for questions, so we can touch on some questions at the end. At Blockchain Labs, we started last year doing security audits on the code of different ICOs. That was pretty exciting. Some of our customers were raising $10 million to $100 million. But the excitement, that would have been exciting enough, but sort of at the end of the year, around December, something really cool happened. It wasn't all about the money. Our customers actually built something on a blockchain. And guess what? That also needs auditing. So we started auditing the platforms of different ICOs. And that's kind of given us a pretty interesting perspective on what an ICO actually is, because we're kind of in the trenches there working with the different teams actually building the platforms that have come from these ICOs. So got a couple of objectives. The presentation's sort of structured in a little bit of an argument, I guess, is a sense. And basically, by the end of it, I'd like you to get a sense that an ICO isn't just a new funding model for your business. ICOs are not a replacement for IPOs. And I'm going to try and express that it's actually a new type of business model. This couple of little disclaimers. This talk's not designed to equip you to fully understanding ICOs. They're really speculative. I don't really endorse any of our clients, and I personally don't invest in the space. And I don't think after you, I'm not endorsing any of these different products. So I mentioned the blockchain, really important aspect. This is a whole presentation in of itself, but I will sort of touch on some of the premises that I have when thinking about the blockchain and ICOs, just to sort of make sure that we're aligned on those premises. So this is our definition of a blockchain, a data structure so secure it can be made public, where altering a copy of that data has no effect. Records can only be appended, and it's all underpinned by a peer-to-peer protocol that enforces the validity. So a couple of key points there: really secure, public, and peer-to-peer protocol. They'll sort of keep popping up. And then this next idea is that, we really consider sort of a blockchain like an internet protocol. So as analogies, if you think of SMTP, which runs email, voice over IP, which runs things like Skype and things, and HTTPS, which runs the internet. So it's really in that family. And that means when we think about it as a way of storing data, its analogy is like a database, but it's not quite a database. It's kind of a really dumb database enforcing a few sort of protocol level rules. That's important because protocols are really disruptive. If you think we went from POST to Gmail to SMTP, and protocols can be really powerful. I've missed a slide here, sorry. And it's hard to talk about blockchains and not talk about Bitcoin. For me, it's not so much about Bitcoin. Bitcoin's kind of the incentive mechanism that overlays the blockchain. And so that leads me to sort of my view is that Bitcoin does have some intangible value. It gives you this inalienable right to write data to the Bitcoin blockchain, and it kind of makes it a little bit different to gold and US dollar. So let's go back here. I've mucked up the order. So now I'll go through sort of the two key concepts to start understanding an ICO, sort of tokens and this idea of a decentralized or peer-to-peer protocol. So I'll start with tokens. So if you've heard about ICO, you've heard about the idea of a tokens, and actually you don't need to know too much about more than that. You actually interact with tokens all of the time. This is my favorite example, is a big rubbish bag. This is a picture of Auckland rubbish bags, so they're council rubbish bags. I'm sure you probably have these in Wellington, where when you want to throw your rubbish out, you get one of these bags and you buy them from the supermarket, and I think they're about $3, and then you put them on your road and someone will come and pick them up. When you buy that rubbish bag from the supermarket, you're not really buying the rubbish bag, you're buying what is essentially a token. It's a right to have your rubbish be picked up. So yeah, this is a cool sort of example of what a token really represents, is a right for something else. And tokens are really pretty powerful in the sense that they reduce what economists call transaction costs. So this is transaction costs, but more in the rich sense of the word. So not just bank fees, but any costs related to an economic transfer happening. And because if you didn't have the council rubbish bags, what would be the alternative? You'd have these trucks going around and picking up all the rubbish, and they'd have to measure how much rubbish that they picked up, and then they'd have to bill each individual house for the rubbish that they picked up. Whereas with a token, we actually get to sidestep all of that. We don't need to have that administration of keeping a track of the rubbish, and we still get to capture all of the economic value of picking up those rubbish bags. Next one, decentralized protocols. That's another one that I have a nice sort of example of. You actually, I don't know about you, but I use BitTorrent all of the time, and this is this protocol that exists that lets you download things from the internet. It's a peer-to-peer way of downloading. So if I'm going to download something, it's not that I'm downloading it directly from one place. I'm downloading it from all the other people that have downloaded it before. And these peer-to-peer protocols are really pretty powerful. If you think about BitTorrent and the amount of movies that get downloaded from these protocols, there's some really powerful people that would love to stop that software, but they can't because there's no single point of failure. All downloaders are also uploaders, and it's really fast, so people really do like using it. But those systems do have a some pretty big problems in the economic sense, that they have sort of the free rider problem or the tragedy of the commons problem, and that when you're downloading something, for the system to work, you kind of also need to upload something for that ecosystem to exist. But there's nothing enforcing you to also be an uploader, a good citizen of that system. Again, as a New Zealand example, we've got these seas with all these fish out there, and if we didn't have some rules in place enforcing that you don't overfish them, then there wouldn't be many fish for us to catch. So those are sort of standard economic problems with these kind of systems that aren't controlled by anyone. And they don't scale. So if you think about a market economy, you've got this nice decentralized market economy, but hey, actually, it turns out not everyone follows the rules. So what we really need is a government to start enforcing some of the rules on the market economy. So we layer that on top. Oh, yeah, we've got all that power in the government. Turns out that we also actually need the people who are a part of that market economy really want to make sure the government's working in their best interest. So then we layer this idea of democracy on the top. And then, it's really hard work to keep up with what all these politicians are doing. I'd really just like it to be summarized and condensed so I know who to vote for. Then we'll create the media and we'll put that on top. And now, sort of, if you follow the media landscape at the moment, even that seems there's this idea of fake news, and it's almost as if we need another layer on top of the media because there's layers of propaganda that are happening. And with each layer of your decentralized sort of system, you're adding more and more transaction costs. So that's where the idea of a token can come in. So that's, the idealized vision of an ICO platform is to solve some of those problems with a decentralized platform with that sort of idea of a token. So scale goodwill by eliminating it, combine a decentralized platform with a token, create a system that doesn't require you to trust anyone, so you don't have to layer all of those different trust mechanisms on top of your system. And then you can have economic activity with the lowest possible transaction costs. So that's the idealized vision. Now, I touched on that example of the rubbish bags as a token. And this is sort of a thought experiment to sort of push that analogy along a little bit. And again, it's just a thought experiment. You'll be able to poke a lot of holes into this, but this is, let's try and decentralize this system. Let's try and use this token and create a decentralized system. So let's get rid of the central rubbish collecting truck and enforce some of these rules in the way that you might be able to do on a blockchain. So you can only peer-to-peer trade your rubbish tokens. The only way to get new rubbish tokens is to drop off your rubbish at the rubbish tip. And then let's presume we can enforce these rules at the blockchain. So with these sorts of rules in place, what kind of system would we expect to perhaps emerge? Well, most people, or not most people, some people are just going to say, okay, well, nothing much, no one's going to come and pick up my rubbish bag. I've got some rubbish bag tokens. To get more, I need to drop off my rubbish. So they're just going to go and drop off their rubbish, get the rubbish bag tokens, get some more rubbish, drop it off themselves. Me, on the other hand, I'm not going to do that. But I do know that my next door neighbor, he always complains about how expensive the rubbish bags are. So I'm kind of expecting that if I leave my rubbish outside, he's probably going to pick it up for me, and he's probably going to take it to the rubbish tip because he's going there anyway, and he's going to collect a couple of surplus tokens that he can sell back to me. So yeah, that's probably what's going to happen at my home. I think some neighborhoods, they're going to decide, oh no, we're not going to take our rubbish back. We're just going to leave it out on the street. We really like the system in which the rubbish truck came and picked up all our rubbish. And that's kind of creating an opportunity for anyone to then start a rubbish collection business. What they can do is they can go down the road, collect all the rubbish bags up, take them to the tip, and then they get a whole bunch of rubbish tokens that they can then perhaps sell to other people. So that's a decentralizing rubbish collections. And actually it does exist. I forget the country in Europe, but there is a system in which they have a decentralized rubbish collection system in a way like this. Not quite with tokens, but similar. And so that kind of leads into some of the examples of what ICOs are kind of doing. I've built up these sorts of analogies to start discussing them. So one good example is Filecoin. What this is essentially a decentralized file system in which you can go and store files on other people's computers. And in order to make sure that they don't do anything funny with your files, there's actually an economic mechanism, the Filecoin, that enforces that good behavior. Next one, WePower. These guys make a token, trying to make a decentralized power network because, hey, I'm going to put a solar panel on the top of my roof of my house and I'm going to sell power back. Well, what I'd really like to do is sell power to my neighbor, but it turns out I have to sell power back to the grid and they're not really willing to actually give me that much of a good price for that power. But hey, these guys believe if we start decentralizing those power networks, we can actually get better agreements between different people. Now these are some of our customers, and I'll sort of touch on a couple of, stories from the trenches. Kyber Network, what they do is they're a decentralized exchange, so they let you trade tokens with other people, but in a way that they never hold on to them. So they let me trade a token with Mariam up the front here, but at no point are they in the hands of anyone else. They're completely decentralized. They enable a trade between us without any middle people in the middle. We did an audit for them of their platform at the beginning of this year, and one of their most important goals was we want to go out to the community and say to the community, there is no possible way for us to steal any tokens from any of our customers. Please just presume the most awful intent from us, Kyber Network, and even under that condition of us acting as really malicious actors, we want to prove to the community that we can't steal anything. Which is kind of cool. Again, this is a Wings project, which was again one of our customers, and what they do is they let you, there's essentially a type of bidding market on different ICOs and whether ICOs will be successful, which is cool. And we did an audit of their platform at one point as well, and I remember reviewing the audit and going through it and noticing that there was essentially pretty much the most important part of their functionality, and I said, well, that functionality, anyone can use that functionality. That isn't restricted to only Wings. If these guys are running a business, I would have expected them to have restricted that pretty much most important functionality of their software. And no, that was intended that their function and their software can actually be run by anyone. It doesn't have to be run by the Wings Foundation. Anyone can start running their software. It's just sort of out in the world, available for people to use without a moat. Another one of our customers, POA Network, started doing an audit for one of their dApps. And interestingly, this particular piece of software that we were working on had quite a lot of overlap with a bank that we were working on. And we sort of mentioned that there was this overlap. And he said, oh, that's fantastic. Please make sure that you put into the contract that you guys own all the IP. Just, you guys make it, give it out. If the bank wants to use it, that's great. We're so happy for that, because our token holders don't actually benefit from us restricting that IP. We just really need people to use the POA network, which is, I've never heard someone be so flippant with the IP of their business. And so, this is sort of a summary of just some sort of token-based decision-making that these customers had, where the first one, they presuppose the worst possible intent for themselves, which I've never interacted with a business that did that. Then built a platform, they built some software in which they don't really even control anymore. And then another one that was just happy for us to sell their IP to whoever we pleased. And they're doing this because they're not quite businesses, right? They're trying to do something quite different. They're not trying to layer all these levels of control on top of their decentralized system. They're trying to get rid of those layers. And it's really strange. I don't really have a framework to think about these organizations very well. The best I've come across is this idea of the theory of the firm, which was a economic idea that firms exist because they internalize transaction costs, such that interacting with them is cheaper than interacting with every single individual within the firm. So there's, as sort of blockchains and tokens and ICOs are sort of changing the nature of how we trust and the cost of that trust, perhaps I think we should expect different sort of institutions to emerge that behave a little bit differently than the firms of the past. So I think this, if you're considering out there doing an ICO, hopefully this has given you a little bit of a perspective of how they're a little bit different. These are just some of the tips that I've sort of considered. This is what we look for when we're trying to taking on clients, is that the team's really demonstrated an understanding of decentralization, that they've got a plan to actually benefit their token holders, not so much their shareholders. Their real stakeholder is actually their token holder, and then teams that get regular feedback from the crypto and crypto community and technical community. And finally, there's just one last section that I'll touch on. I'm sure some of you will be out there, and I don't really agree with this idealized vision of what an ICO is. What I really want to use is my tokens in my current business. So that is a thing that is coming. That's more what they call a security token, which is a little bit different to the type of tokens that we've been discussing today. And the first thing, if you want to go down that route, is just to be mindful that circumventing security laws isn't innovating. But I think there is some opportunity here in this idea of a security token. And these ones, as a contrasting point, would be a little bit more like an IPO. A security token isn't quite an ICO, and they're having these tokens represent financial interests and things that actually exist in the real world. They aren't just a mechanism, an economic incentive mechanism for a decentralized platform. So sort of think tokens equal shares or tokens equal bonds. And so this is quite a nice contrasting point where there's something quite different. Advocates for this kind of approach of security tokens talk about how it would enable a more transparent market and eliminate practices like naked shorts, which is this idea that short selling is this way where you can sell stocks that you don't actually own, but turns out some people borrow one share and sell it to many, many, many different people using this collateral. And if you had a blockchain, some of these sort of illegal practices might be better managed. So yeah, that's, I think, one of the stronger arguments for using a security token. But there's some big challenges. Lots of different organizations would like to regulate securities. It's a highly regulated market, and there's heaps of different regulations that are fragmented over many different jurisdictions. And yeah, there's a lot more that you have to do to actually have a security token. And then at the moment, tokens that exist on the Ethereum network, which are the primary, most of them, there are other networks that have tokens, they're really permissionless. So if you're going to have a bunch of different regulations and rules that you now have to follow for your token, sort of the infrastructure that we currently have for what we think of as tokens doesn't quite work. They can be sent to anyone. What we really need is this idea of a token that can only be sent to the people that follow the rules that are tightly regulated. So there's a couple of cool proposals for a permission token. So just some of the few ones that I could think of: Open Zeppelin, Polymath, and we actually are quite interested in this idea of a permission token. So that's a good sort of summary of ICOs and how we sort of think about them. As I said, I've left plenty of space for questions. So any questions? Oh. No worries.
A few months ago, I had quite a good chat. I was fortunate to chat with Aaron from Decentralized.
Oh, yes.
And obviously they've done great things. But his concept is that they're building an ecosystem around the product that they're developing. Could you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, so I can't say I'm particularly familiar with precisely what Centrality does, but I imagine that it's along this idea of that they're trying to develop a sort of a platform, but like a decentralized platform in which it isn't quite a company, is what I think they're trying to achieve. I can't say I specifically know exactly what Centrality and Aaron are doing, but I imagine that it does follow a very similar pattern in which they're trying to use a token to enforce economic rules on that ecosystem that they're creating, right? So you're creating an ecosystem, and hey, that ecosystem needs a bunch of rules. It needs people to behave in ways that actually benefit the ecosystem. What's one of the better ways to do that? Let's just layer a sort of economic incentive model on top of it so that if people do break the rules, they actually lose something or they don't gain something. So if you sort of think of like the torrent example, where say you had a coin where as you download you have to pay coins, and then as you upload you earn coins, that sort of makes it a little bit more of a virtuous cycle. So yeah, I suspect they're following a very similar sort of pattern there. Does that answer your question?
Well, my slight confusion is that if you have a bunch of ICOs, you can't exchange token value between those different platforms or entities. Is that correct?
No, you might be able to. I don't know specifically what you're talking about, but there are exchanges that exist that let you sort of exchange tokens from different types of platforms all over the world. That's one of the big benefits of going down this route, is that it's really difficult to build all of that payment infrastructure and let you transfer your token into real world dollars or to another token. And so by following this sort of model or these standards, you actually get a lot of that exchange infrastructure for a pretty low cost. You don't actually have to build that yourself.
It's actually a good point, because it's like the point where Soros tokens became just money exchange, and then became again Soros tokens.
Okay. Anyone else? Hello.
Can you elaborate a little bit more about the difference between the security tokens and
Yeah.
type, and what kind of consequences does it have in terms of regulation and in terms of new business models for crypto economics? I remember that Totalitarian was talking about there's a whole new way of doing business because if your token holders or your shareholders, then you can do completely different.
Yes. So I'm not a lawyer, so I can't can't tell you the precise legal definition between those two. But what I've observed is that there's really a big distinction between. I've tried to of this pattern where you've got your security tokens over here, and let's just call these utility tokens over here. And when they are really tightly coupled to the software that's actually behind that token, that's where I think there's quite a big distinction between a security token, where you've got so over here you've got a business and hey, this token entitles you to some profit of the business, where over here you've got a token like, say, Filecoin, where it's actually really coupled. You've got this decentralized system and an economic model on top of it, and it actually doesn't work without both those things. So I think the tighter the coupling between your software and your token or your coin, sort of the more you're filling into that model of your stakeholders being your customers, because does that answer your question? Yeah.
I mean, it's early days.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
But maybe from the perspective of your company, Blockchain Labs, so you seem to be focused on auditing. So where do you see the business models evolving in the future? Because if you are an auditor, then you must have seen some trends or growth, what's happening at the moment.
Yep. Okay. So I'd say the thing, if it sounds like you're asking how are things going to evolve, and I think probably one of the interesting things is, well, we've presented this as a dichotomy. Hey, you're a security token over here, or you're this coupled token over here. It's probably going to be a little bit in the middle. There's a whole spectrum there. So I think what's sort of happening now is a little bit more experimenting with, hey, we've got this completely trustless system like Filecoin or like WePower, but those systems kind of do require pretty large network adoption, and there's not actually that many opportunities that present that particular pattern. So I think that you are going to come into the middle more, and you're not going to have such a tight coupling. You're not going to have this completely trustless system that can go out and exist in the world. You're going to have these things that are a little bit in the middle there. Yeah. Hello.
Hey, just a question. Awesome. Just regarding security tokens, right? You mentioned Polymath, Zeppelin. Polymath is trying to boil the ocean with regard to security tokens. Many people said, like, yeah, good luck with that.
I hear you.
Roll.
Yep.
Good luck with that.
Uh-huh.
So, and then you're like, at the bottom, you're like Blockchain Labs. So you have a more pragmatic approach. Talk about the pragmatic approach.
Oh.
It's not boiling the ocean. Just give like 3 bullet points of like, okay, we think this.
So I think that the first thing that you need to solve for security tokens, so you don't want to do dividends and share splits and all this sort of thing, is you need to have a permission layer. You need to be able to say, hey, I've got some rules that my token can only go to these types of people. But it isn't just that you want to enforce those rules. You want to have a way to be able to change how those rules work over time, because the regulations are going to change. So our kind of view of a security token is something that pretty much is just an ERC20. It works with my Ether wallet. It works with all of the different software that my ERC20 works, but it gives you sort of a rule set so that it can only be transferred to people that you want, and then an ability to change that rule set over time so that you can expand the scope of who can have that token. So that's our sort of pragmatic view of how security tokens should work. Yeah, no worries. Hey, man.
I've got a question in relation to security tokens.
Nice.
So blockchains have some underlying weaknesses like 51% attacks, 1/3 faulty nodes, and things like that.
Yep.
Do these things get amplified at the smart contract layer for the token, or can the smart contract layer kind of limit the amount of damage that can be done? This would, I imagine, play a role in the security tokens.
Yeah.
Can the damage be amplified, or is it kind of hampered with extra condition on the smart contract?
Yeah, so I think, yes, so blockchains do have some weaknesses, and you do, in terms of security tokens, you kind of want to use them, you want to use it's sort of a trustless spectrum, right? So there's new blockchains that are coming out that have different types of consensus mechanisms. So for example, you had the POA network that what they do is they're a proof of authority consensus mechanism, and they rely on the fact that all of their nodes are actually owned by US notaries. So that's their trust mechanism. And there's actually many different types of consensus mechanisms that have different properties.
Does that affect the token at the token layer? Does that come up at that layer? Do you know what I mean? Like if it's on the blockchain layer, that security threat, does it come up at the token layer, at the smart contract layer? That same, or can you hamper it down?
Yep. And so I guess what I'm getting to is that it isn't just you're on one blockchain or the other. It's sort of like a chain of chains. So you want, say, the biggest amount of your balance of your tokens, the one that's settled that you're not transacting with very often, you want that on something that's pretty secure. But hey, if you're going over here and you're wanting to trade them on a security exchange, we've done a little bit of work for T0, and I know they're finding it really hard to do a full security exchange on a Ethereum network because, hey, it's actually pretty slow. We want something that's a little bit less trustless. So yeah, I think your answer to your question isn't so binary or discrete as that. There's going to be bridging between different chains and to fit different purposes. Hello.
I had a chance to go to the blockchain event in Auckland last Thursday.
Nice.
Done by David Bird.
Yeah.
He was talking about a third type of a token system called identity tokens.
Ah, yes.
On top of the security tokens.
Yep.
Would you like to elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, so that it's quite interesting, does intersect quite with the earlier question about security tokens, because how can you stop someone from receiving a token if you don't know anything about them? So yeah, this idea of having, I think the best way to think about it is on the blockchain a whole bunch of assertions by different parties about you, because that's all what your identity is essentially people making assertions about you and then you having that thing that you control. So yeah, I think identity is going to be a pretty important sort of cab that needs to come off the rank for a lot of the stuff to work, for sure. James. Thank you.
One of the slides you talked about was about sort of like the different regulatory space of security tokens. So whether that's being an accredited investor or being in certain jurisdictions or whatever it is. That is basically the exact opposite of the idea of decentralization. Where every person is a person, and it doesn't matter where you are, who you are.
Yep.
And so how do you think this is going to look into the future? Right now, there's going to be utility and security. It's pretty binary.
Yep.
But I think looking to the future, how that space is going to sort of intersect or dissect or your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think identity is an important aspect. So having identity on a blockchain does mean that while you get some of the benefits of decentralization, you're sort of still letting us control the rules in a centralized way. In our group of companies, we're working with a company called Sphere, which does an identity, and one quite common thing that gets talked about when talking about Sphere identity is that, they do identity, and that sort of gets pushed under the rug. They think, they just do identity, but actually what they do is they accept documentation about you, they never hold on to it, and then they have machine learning algorithms that run across the documentation and then actually produce an identity score. So, hey, this person is 77% likely to be a person. So that's enabled by some of the blockchain technology. So we're quite far away from a society of sort of being able to accept things like that, but I suspect it's innovations like that which will move the sort of centralized world a little bit closer to the decentralized world, but not everything needs to be decentralized. Decentralized is really expensive. It's really hard to, it's really hard to keep up with everything that's going on. And if you had to vote on all of the different rules of all the different protocols that you're a part of, it's just kind of tough. So I personally view that there will always be a little bit of centralization in the space. Yeah. Hi, Alex.
Just the last question here and the previous one. think that it's, you see, it's up to you. No one forces you to share information about you, and if you want to use that secure tokens, you just have to share some information about you, at least for the regulators, and then you can use that secure tokens.
Do you think that that's like a middle ground though? Like it's not the end game?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a middle ground. You're never going to get to that sort of pure decentralized world. There's always going to be, yes, sort of sensible sort of rules that are put in place.
People like to believe to some, the reason why religion exists. They need to trust someone, not the technology, but someone.
Hello.
And does it mean that there is no legal control or regulation between about identity?
I don't know if I understand the question.
We have real me. I mean, that's not on the blockchain. So, let's get real. Come on, let's forget the blockchain. I mean, I know all about the blockchain. We have real me. So why do you need the blockchain to do identity?
Yeah. So, is it a serious question or?
Sorry. Not against you, but it's his question.
Was that not sarcasm?
It was double uber sarcasm.
Well, because we are working with DIA on a blockchain-based identity, and the thing that is different. So, whenever you're using a blockchain, you really need to ask yourself, well, is this better than a database? And if the question is, most of the time the question to that is no. But there are use cases where actually what we're doing with a blockchain can't be done with a database. Oh, that's probably a good use case for a blockchain. And then, so if you think about identity as just a list of assertions about you onto your key, you get what's essentially self-sovereign ID. You get an identification that actually you control rather than someone else controlling that. So yeah, it is different to real me for sure. So I didn't. You got interrupted, so I didn't quite understand your question.
I don't know how to express my idea, but
Yeah.
so as you said right now, so everyone controls this own identity,
Uh-huh.
but if there is a data exchange or whatever exchange it is, there are two sides, right? And what about identity and control and trust and legal regulations of the?
Also, say I have a self-sovereign ID, and I let anyone make assertions about me. When I go to the liquor store, the law is going to be, well, we only trust the assertion made by the transport agency that you're older than 18. So it isn't that, like, there's going to be a decentralized aspect to it. Hey, anyone can make any assertion, but you don't have to trust those assertions. The law will say, we need this particular assertion from this particular institution, and you need to prove that that transaction came from their public key or something along those lines. I think that might be how it works. Yep. Nice. Any other questions? Hey.
Has any New Zealand company produced a security token successfully?
Well, there's probably, you get into you probably need a lawyer, because what is a security token and what is a utility token? I only have a bit of a technology hat person on where I see the two things. I think some people would argue that all tokens are securities, and in which case, if you believe in that, then yes, people have launched tokens. But anyone who's specifically said that they're going to do precisely a security token, not that I know of. Yeah, there might be, not that I know of.
So is there inflation, like can more tokens be created, are they mined in the same way that Bitcoin is, and more coming into existence? Or
Yeah. Yeah, so inflation is kind of this, is a phenomenon created by reserve banks, right, which is attached to fiat currency. So, yeah, there can be, you can have like inflation-like rules into your token. Yes, you can do whatever you like, right? It's not common though. Mostly they're fixed supply.
So it's a fixed supply, but if demand goes up and it's a utility token and it becomes, everybody wants these things.
Yep. Well, that's the
Too
proposition.
much
Well, that's
for the utility.
yeah, yes. So if we think about the rubbish bag example, right? We've got these rubbish bag tokens. Hey, if we fix the supply of them and made them tradable on the internet, then they'd probably be worth quite a lot as well. So, yeah, I think that's the proposition that the contributors are hoping for. They're hoping that you're right, that the price keeps going up because they bought at this price and they'd like it to be really, really useful and be worth more.
The difference with the rubbish bag example is that if you had it fixed in a dollar amount, right, we said it's $1 for one rubbish bag, then it wouldn't matter how high the value of that token went, right? Because every time I need a rubbish bag token, I would pay $1 and get one rubbish bag token. And so you would end up getting 0.000012 of a rubbish bag token. That would count as one exchange of putting a rubbish bag into the rubbish bag.
There's a couple of issues with the token analogy. First of all,
I did not warrant it without any issues. It was really more a thought experiment, but I'm happy to discuss it.
my rubbish to be collected.
Yes, so in that particular example, it's not a fixed supply, right? It just, you get them by returning them. So you take your rubbish in, you get more tokens. So it actually isn't a fixed supply model.
When you have all of your yard, full field with
Yeah, you guys will say you're doing auditing.
Yes.
So are you looking for speculation in this?
Yeah. Good question. So it's more a security audit of, so whenever you deploy code to a blockchain for it to run on that blockchain, it's kind of immutable, it's unstoppable. Once it's there, anyone can use it. And so if there's any sort of defects in that smart contract or that software that you've deployed to the blockchain, anyone in the world can exploit it, right? So what sort of emerged, there was quite a few high-profile hacks, or there's still high-profile hacks, and what sort of emerged in the community is that you always get a second, third, sometimes even fourth pair of eyes to look over anything that you're deploying to a smart contract, particularly if it's going to hold a lot of money. So, yeah, looking at the code, yeah, and running it and deploying it ourselves and using it and trying to break it and, yeah, trying to be a hacker. Yeah, yeah.
On the other hand, developer have
Alex likes statements.
available contract and also, considerations. I mean, you should then be sure that this upgradable contract wouldn't be maliciously used later. So, consideration.
Nice. Cool. Got to the end there.
Questions? Okay, we'll wrap up there.
Cool. Awesome.
Thank you very much, Matthew.
No worries. Thank you.